Good evening. I'm Kalamazoo Deputy City Manager Jeff Chamberlain, and welcome to the May 4, 2020 Kalamazoo City Commission meeting. Tonight's meeting is being streamed live on the city's Facebook page and YouTube channel. You can also listen on your phone by calling area code 269-552-6425 and entering meeting ID number 935-9780-9892 when prompted. And you may leave a public comment for tonight's meeting by calling area code 269-226-6573. I'd like to turn tonight's meeting over to Kalamazoo City Mayor David Anderson.
Thank you so much, Deputy City Manager Jeff Chamberlain. It's a pleasure to be here at another virtual public City Commission meeting. So everyone is present, and we will go through our regular agenda items. This meeting is being called to order for Monday, May 4th. Clerk Borling, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Cunningham.
Here.
Commissioner Hess.
Here.
Commissioner Knott.
Here.
Commissioner Pradel.
Present.
Commissioner Urban.
Here.
Vice Mayor Griffin.
Here.
Mayor Anderson.
Here. Thank you so much, all present and accounted for. Our opening ceremony tonight, we have Michelle Scheidt from the Fetzer Institute for the invocation. Ms. Scheidt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. As we prepare to begin this important meeting tonight, I thank you for inviting me to be a part of these proceedings, and I invite us to take a moment to open our hearts and our spirits. Let us ask for the wisdom that is most needed at this time as we begin with a moment of silence. During this unprecedented time of challenge in our community and our world, we call to mind and to heart all those who are affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. Those sheltering in place at home, essential workers who risk their own safety to meet the needs of others, who feel lonely or isolated, struggling with conflict or violence, whom home is not a safe place today. The many whose economic lives have been destroyed by job loss. People who are not able to meet their basic needs for food and shelter. And all of us whose lives have been disrupted during this time as we struggle with change and seek to face future days, weeks, and months filled with the unknown. We ask that all may be safe, that all may be free from fear, that all may be happy, that all may know love. We also pause to give thanks, offering gratitude for all the care that is being extended during this time. We give thanks for retail workers, medical personnel, first responders, office workers, loved ones, and neighbors who care for each other in so many large and small ways each day. We give thanks also for the amazing response of our city to this pandemic and for our strong leaders and their ability to respond effectively in this time of crisis. In this gathering tonight, we ask for guidance for our city and our leaders. We ask for kindness to listen compassionately, even when ideas are difficult. We ask for wisdom to make the best decisions for all. We ask for openness to respect each person's ideas, even if we may disagree. And we ask for the gift of our democracy to be present, that the voice of the people may be heard, including those who may be most marginalized. As together we yearn for a community that is equitable, we ask for the strength to work for the greater good of all as we seek to build the beloved community in Kalamazoo. Tonight, we face critical issues for our community: housing, zoning, marijuana use, and others. Through all of these topics, we hold a deep focus on social equity and ask for the guidance to do what is right. As we begin these critical conversations now, we remember the many needs of our community and our responsibility to respond with compassion, fairness, and wisdom. Thank you, and I extend my best wishes for each of you and the good work you are doing on our behalf.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your opening for this meeting. Commissioners, you have before you the agenda for tonight's meeting. Are there any changes you'd like to see? Seeing no changes, has there been any request, Deputy City Manager Chamberlain, from the public as far as changes on the agenda?
No, there have not.
Thank you so much. Next item is communications. Manager Ritzma, any communications?
Nothing, Your Honor.
Thank you so much. So now we are down to public hearings, and item E1 is a public hearing. Would you like to take care of that, Manager Ritzma?
Sure. Item E1 is a public hearing to receive comments on an ordinance to approve text amendments to Chapter 50, the zoning ordinance, for the purpose of updating definitions, permitted uses, districts, lot type standards, and parking regulations following the 2025 master plan.
Thanks so much, Manager Ritzma. Are there any comments on item E1?
Yes, we do have a couple, Mayor, and we will broadcast those.
Thank you.
Okay, we're getting them in order here, and they'll be up just a second. Thank you.
Mike Fleckenstein. I live at 125 West Cedar, City of Kalamazoo. Recently, the concerned housing providers of the City of Kalamazoo delivered our response to the proposed human rights ordinance revisions to Chapter 18 Code of Ordinance. We also solicited the input from the Greater Kalamazoo Association of Realtors Board of Directors and the Michigan Association of Realtors legal staff. You have these documents. We also solicited opinions from many practitioners and surveyed the surrounding townships and cities to assess their positions. We have invested considerable time because we believe the proposed ordinance is universally important. Without restating the salient points, we point out that the intent of the proposed ordinance does not solve the problems that are faced by not just those seeking housing, but those who provide it. No amount of human rights ordinances will create more housing or stop chronic bad behavior, major impediments to all. The failure of the proponents of this proposed ordinance to timely deliver scientific methods used in the underlying data should be a red flag to anyone charged with making a big decision. And the conclusions drawn from a skewed presentation where data are cherry-picked offers no credibility to the study. No amount of suppression of documentation will convince a constituency that scientific analysis and transparency do not matter. The Commission must not force the limited population of housing providers to carry the concentrated weight of the housing users, create greater risk for the financial structures of the providers, or expose their other tenants to unknown dangers. No amount of legislation will stop good housing providers from exiting the community where overregulation removes the joy of work and commitment. The importance of this effort to our community is far greater than any one person, any one commission, and any one community to handle correctly. Public comment only goes so far. Without the technical engagement of those who know the business, who practice social science, who experience daily problems, and who understand the law, these problems cannot be solved. The housing providers of this community demand a seat at the table to help craft a proper solution. The commission, in charge of this beloved city of Kalamazoo, must get it right. Technical engagement is how you do that. Thank you very much for allowing me to make my comments.
So, thank you very much, Deputy City Manager. It seems to me that that comment was related to an item that is actually not on our agenda tonight, unless I misunderstood it. This particular ordinance is related to updating definitions, permitted uses, districts, lot type standards. Is that accurate?
Yes, you're correct, Mr. Mayor, and that comment was played at the wrong time. And
Okay.
that was a regular public comment. So I think Scott Borling, if you could just record that as public comment received. We did not receive any other public hearing, public comments.
Okay. At this point, if it's okay with folks, I would like, just for clarity, because these are rather dense things to do, with your permission, Manager Ritzma, is it okay to have our city planner, Christina Anderson, talk a little bit about some of the details on this ordinance that we're talking about this evening?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mayor, City Manager Itzma. So the first item, the public hearing item that we are looking at tonight, are updates to our Chapter 50 zoning ordinance. And these changes went to Plan Commission earlier this winter and kind of got caught up in COVID and scheduling, which is why they're just coming before you tonight in May. The changes focus on three things, or kind of the intent behind them are related to three things. The first is, we've had Chapter 50 in existence for about 18 months, and through its use, we have found that there were a couple of sticking points, things that we found that there were variances needed or that needed language clarifications. And so a lot of the edits that are in front of you are related to that. Second, we are planning to expand the location where some of our new zoning districts are located, including Liverpool 1, Liverpool 2, and nodes based on our master plan. Had COVID not been our reality right now, those changes would be in front of you right now because we had started public hearings with neighborhoods this winter. Things got a little bit delayed, but the changes that are in front of you in the text help set us up for more success in that. To make sure that the districts work in a variety of locations. And finally, the changes relate to downtown as we start to get ready to do a rezoning process in downtown Kalamazoo. As you know, downtown right now is just one giant district known as CCBD, Commercial Central Business District. And we have found through Imagine Kalamazoo and our downtown conversations that it's a little more fine-grained than that. We have the principal shopping area along the mall and Michigan Avenue. We have, blocks that immediately touch that and the rest of downtown, and they all warrant a slightly different zoning district to make sure that we're promoting residential in the right places and retail in the right places. So those comprise a good, the intent behind what is in the code tonight.
Thank you, Planner Anderson. Can you also just remind us again what the process is for having an ordinance approved and what
Sure.
step we are in that process?
Absolutely. That's a great point, given our other case tonight. This is up for approval tonight, which is why it is listed as a public hearing. This item was heard by Plan Commission in February, unanimously approved and recommended. The first reading of this item was scheduled to happen on the first meeting that was canceled because of COVID. At your last meeting, you did take up this item as its first reading and set today as its public hearing.
That means tonight we not are just setting a hearing, we are actually voting on the ordinance itself. And how, if it is passed this evening, and how quickly will that ordinance come into effect?
Sure. Ordinances come into effect 10 days after their approval date. So that would be May 14th.
Okay, so a little bit of a skip this time, because usually one meeting and then a consecutive meeting, we set the hearing date, and then we have the ordinance come before us. So there's less lapse of memory in terms of what's happening because it's going
Right.
on. It's just a little different this time.
Right.
So I understand that there are no comments, Deputy City Manager Chamberlain, on this. Commissioners, are there, let me see here. Okay, commissioners, the recommended action is a motion to adopt the ordinance. Is there a motion?
I so move.
Made by Commissioner Urban.
Support.
Support by Commissioner Knott. Is there any discussion? All right, thanks so much. Clerk Borling, please call the roll.
Commissioner Hess,
Yes.
Commissioner Knott,
Yes.
Commissioner Pradel,
Yes.
Commissioner Urban,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Griffin,
Yes.
Mayor Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Cunningham.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes and the ordinance is adopted. So we now on our agenda, before we go into our consent agenda, we have modified our agenda for our virtual meetings, that we have a public comment time before our consent agenda. So Deputy City Manager Chamberlain, are there items for this public comment time?
Yes, we do. We do have some public comments that have come in on just general topics.
Okay.
And we'll.
Oh, hello there, commissioners. My name is Paula Chomas, and I ride my bike all over the city. A lot of you may have seen me. I have a purple bike and a blue and a pink helmet, but I am calling because I have been cleaning the rubbish around Axtell Creek, pulling things out of the drain for one of the ponds. It was going to overflow. I have seen other people picking up trash and pulling invasive mustard weeds at Kleinstuck, and they leave them on the trail, I guess, so that other people know what they are and they can pick them. And I was wondering if we can somehow get a volunteer group together to pick up trash all over the city. Mostly I have seen a lot of it over off of East Main where the bridges are. I had seen people under there last year, and they left a lot of trash. And I can't pick up some of that stuff sometimes, and I would like to know if we could have a coronavirus task force. Don't stand social distancing to help clean up the city. Call it Pick Up Kalamazoo. I have pulled some metal strippings from underneath the weeds over at Axtell Creek across Howard Street, and there was quite a bit of it on the side, on the grass, and some woman came by and she took it, and she told me later that she recycled it, and I told her there's more in there. And it just happened that Saturday I was out picking up things, and she had a long pole, and she's looking to pick up stuff out of the water that I can't reach. So we had a nice chat about that. And so if we can find other people in the city that are doing it alone, maybe we could have some kind of volunteer list. And the fellow who was pulling mustard weed said, there's no volunteers, there's no leader. He was doing it alone. I saw other people doing it alone. Even over here across Town Parkway where I live with the senior community, I have seen it, somebody pulling up mustard, the invasive mustard plants. But my main concern is all the garbage and the trash. And it would give other people something to do and make our city more beautiful. And I, as a person who have been in need of many things, have volunteered for things when I didn't have a job, and it led to a job. But I'm not saying that can happen right now. My name is Paula Chomas, and my number is 269-903-9247. And I am familiar with David Anderson. I don't know if this is important. I did work at Community Mental Health, and I worked with homeless people. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you very much. Next, please.
General comment for non-agenda. Jeff Messer, city resident. Thank you to the city administration for responding to the remarks I gave at last week's meeting by reopening all city parks effective this Wednesday. I would like to hear the city attorney's opinion on the continued use of electronic meetings by all city boards following the expiration of Governor Whitmer's emergency powers last week Thursday at 11:59 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, please.
Hello, my name is Jeff Bertolasi. I'm a resident of Portage. However, I have several properties in Kalamazoo City, and I would like to read to the commissioners the following letter provided to each of you by the Michigan Association of Realtors regarding the proposed amendment to Chapter 18 of the City of Kalamazoo. The amendments are difficult to understand and apply, and create uncertainty for professionals in the real estate sales and property management. Sections contrast with other sections that lack any detail at all. In a number of cases, the same material is covered in different sections without reference to the others, and in ways that appear to contradict the others, or at least make their application unclear or ambiguous. In many circumstances, a property manager or sales agent will not know or would not ask to know information that might indicate a number of the criteria addressed in the ordinance. As this review makes clear, the issues presented by the ordinance really require a detailed dialogue to evaluate how transactions work from the seller, buyer, and the renter, and the property owner's side, as well as their business practices. For these reasons, Michigan Realtors urges the Kalamazoo City Commission to take the time to have the discussion before further consideration adopting of the amendments. David E. Pearson, Legal Counsel of the Michigan Association of Realtors, and from the Office of McCollum and Anderson, Lansing, Michigan. The Greater Kalamazoo Association of Realtors also provided the Kalamazoo City Commissioners a letter from their directors stating the following. After careful review of the analysis completed by Michigan Realtors for the proposed amendments, we are submitting our formal request to extend a review period of not less than 6 months before adopting the proposed amendments regarding Chapter 18 of the City of Kalamazoo. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening. I am Wendy Denning, a resident and housing provider in the City of Kalamazoo. My comment tonight is not on the zoning ordinance, but rather on another topic, namely the Human Rights Ordinance. I request that the Commission not adopt the proposed Human Rights Ordinance as written. I request that a moratorium be established for at least 6 months, during which time the drafters work with local housing providers to clarify its language. As a housing provider, I am sympathetic to what I believe its goals are and can support what I think its intent is. We housing providers have been blindsided by this ordinance that will seriously affect us, and we were not asked to have input. It penalizes housing providers for not following the rules, yet it does not spell out what the rules are. The housing providers in Kalamazoo that I know are good landlords and caring, compassionate people. The current HRO makes us out to be unfair and prejudiced. Its language drives a wedge between local housing providers and the community we are trying to serve. It is incendiary. I feel that without local housing providers' input, it will continue to be divisive and it will pit, quote, us against them, unquote. One of the goals of the HRO is truth and unity. Instead, the document as written is punitive and divisive. I have contacted Commissioner Griffin, Isaac, and Truth to see if we can have a constructive discussions and work together to tweak the language so that the HRO can be a unifying document for the city of Kalamazoo. Again, I request that the commission not adopt the proposed human rights ordinance as written. I request that a moratorium be established for at least 6 months, during which time the drafters work with local housing providers to clarify its language. Thank you, Wendy Denning.
Thank you. Next, please.
Good evening. My name is Joey Kedgebu. My address is 730 East Court, Kalamazoo, Michigan, and I am calling in regards to the current adult use proposed draft ordinance that is on the table for tonight's hearing. I know a lot of time and effort has gone into this ordinance, and the topic of the ordinance remains a relatively controversial one in marijuana. We have diligently followed the progress of the city's meetings and developments as they relate to adult use marijuana regulations. 2 years ago, a medical marijuana ordinance was put in place with significant zoning and regulatory regulations in an effort to minimize the presence of marijuana-related businesses. At that time, in a market where there were only approximately 300,000 potential consumers in the entire state that held medical marijuana cards, the city sought to limit provisioning centers' presence and ability to operate. Now, confusingly, the city is near adopting an ordinance that has almost no zoning or regulatory barriers to entry and will undoubtedly result in oversaturation of the market where anybody and everybody who is of age could patronize these shops. We have reviewed Mr. Robinson's summaries and fully appreciate his interpretation of MRTMA when he says and believes that cities do not have the authority to restrict adult use operations from anything except proximity to schools and daycares. However, there are municipalities throughout the state that have adopted ordinances that include churches, residential zone parcels, parks, and numerous other sensitive uses that have gone unchallenged. What's more puzzling is the city has taken almost little to no feedback from the public regarding the residents' desire to have these marijuana retailers spread vastly throughout the city. We would ask that the City Commission deny approval of the draft ordinance before you so that more information can be gathered from the public and the city to reevaluate which sensitive uses should be protected from recreational marijuana, similar to how the city analyzed the medical marijuana ordinance years ago. In black and white, MRTMA affords municipalities the ability to regulate the time, place, and manner for when and where adult use licensees can operate. There is no limitation to that. And this language is used throughout many other state statutes. It was specifically planted to afford municipalities the ability to govern their own marijuana regulations. Thank you for your time. Have a good evening. Be safe.
Thank you so much. Next, please.
Hello, my name is Omar Fakori, 736 East Corp Street. Appreciate the opportunity to provide some feedback on the adult use marijuana ordinance. I did send an email last week to the commission. I did put a lot of detail and thought into it. I didn't get much feedback, but I hope everybody had a chance to review. I did want to highlight two concerns of the draft ordinance that I believe have not gotten enough discussion from the Planning Commission or City Commission. So the first item I'd like to see some sort of more discussion on is the option for a protective buffer around sensitive uses. So essentially what this is protecting places like parks and churches and substance abuse facilities so that a marijuana dispensary, wouldn't be able to locate within a certain distance of it, say 500 or 1,000 feet. The city, in our opinion, has the right to include these buffers if they feel that it is appropriate and is sort of the consensus. Much like what was done on the medical marijuana ordinance, and frankly, which has been done on this draft ordinance in some circumstances. For instance, buffers around certain intersections, 660 feet, as well as being located next to a convenience store on the same parcel. So those are also restricted. The city can do the same for parks and churches. So I think a discussion on this with the City Commission would be valuable and is warranted. You really only get one chance at it, and I just want to make sure that the discussion happens and that everybody's sort of in agreement on what might be appropriate or best suited on this. just as a benchmark or a reference on the medical marijuana side, there were measures put in place to say, hey, you can't be located near a public library, university, housing facility, church, public pools, rec facilities, playgrounds, youth centers, substance abuse facilities. This ordinance for adult use is really silent on all of those. The second item that I'd like to see some discussion on, that I wanted to weigh in on also, is the social equity clauses that claim to be a benefit to social equity applicants. I think the intent is exactly on point. I'm just concerned with the loopholes and how devastating those will be for existing operators and social equity. So really, the impact of this, social equity benefit of reducing distances is you will, end up with a large amount of facilities that will result in failure for most. And I think that actually will impact both existing operators and social equity. I believe a better solution would be to keep the same buffers as the medical ordinance, but open up the application period to social equity applicants only. So this gets rid of this oversaturation issue, which hurts really everybody, but also gives benefit to social equity so that they can get a foothold in the industry with a real chance to succeed. So in summary, let's have the discussion on buffers of sensitive uses, and let's have a discussion on the concerns around oversaturation and whether this ordinance is beneficial to social equity. It is much easier to ease restrictions later if we feel like it's warranted than it is to add more at that time. So appreciate the opportunity, and thanks, and stay safe.
Thank you so much. Next, please.
Hello, this is Jeff Bertolisi, resident of Portage. However, I own properties in Kalamazoo City. I'm calling in regards to Chapter 18, the city ordinance. Commissioners, I will read the following letter provided to you
Deputy
by the
City
Michigan
Manager
Association of
Chamberlain.
Realtors regarding the proposed amendment
Yes.
to Chapter 18 of the City of
Can you hear this
Kalamazoo.
one again?
Right.
The
I'm gonna try
amendments
to
are
get this one
difficult
turned
to
off. It came in
understand and
twice.
apply.
Yeah, there we go. We had a duplication of it. We'll
Okay.
just make sure we weren't cutting anybody out that we hadn't already heard.
Fair
That was
enough.
the last one, sir.
Thank you so much. I appreciate how well you managed that. Not an easy task. And I also want to thank everybody that takes time in this more cumbersome way to put together a set of cogent comments to provide those in this public setting. So thank you so much for when it took the effort to do that. So we are back to our regular agenda now, and the first item up now on our regular agenda is the consent agenda. City Manager Ritzma, will you please take us through that?
Thank you, Your Honor. We have 6 items for approval this evening. First is the approval of a 1-year contract extension for loading, hauling, and disposal of belt press solids with Waste Management in the amount of $5,538,110, and approval of a budget adjustment in the amount of $1,158,901.67 to cover the 2020 portion of the contract amount. Next is the approval of a contract and purchase order with SWT Excavating Incorporated for the new water service installation project in the amount of $723,588.77. Next is the adoption of a resolution of support for local bridge program funds for the Gull Road Bridge. Next is the adoption of a resolution of support for local bridge program funds for the Inkster Avenue Bridge. Next is the approval of the following first quarter amendments to the 2020 budget appropriations. General Fund, $359,000 increase. Major Streets Fund, $140,000 increase. Local Streets, $140,000 decrease. Solid Waste, $379,442 increase. Blight Abatement, $250,000 increase. Capital Improvement Fund, a $2 million reduction. And Water Capital Improvements, a $500,000 reduction. And finally, an insurance fund of $430,500 increase. And finally, the approval of the purchase of 447 East Stockbridge Avenue from the county land bank in the amount of $9,882 to construct a segment of the Kalamazoo River Valley Trail that extends south from the farmer's market.
Thanks so much, Manager Ritzma. Commissioners, the requested action is to approve items 1 through 6 and authorize the city manager to sign all documents on behalf of the city. Is there a motion?
So
So
moved.
moved.
Made by
Support.
Commissioner Cunningham, support by Commissioner Hess. Clerk Borling, please call the roll.
Commissioner Knott,
Yes.
Commissioner Pradel,
Yes.
Commissioner Urban,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Griffin,
Yes.
Mayor Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Cunningham,
Yes.
Commissioner Hess.
Yes.
Thank you, Commissioners. The items on the consent agenda are approved. Next are items on the regular agenda. City Manager Ritzma.
Yes, item H1, adoption of an ordinance approving the issuance and sale of water supply system revenue bonds, Series 2020A, for an amount not to exceed $22 million, and adoption of a notice of sale resolution.
Commissioners, the recommended action is to adopt the ordinance and resolution. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by
Support.
Commissioner Knott, supported by
Cunningham.
Commissioner Cunningham. Any discussion? Just a quick question here before I ask Clerk Borling to call the roll. Remind me again when we set the hearing on this. This is the hearing date.
I will defer to our CFO, Steve Vicenzi.
Just unmuting real quick. The hearing on this was, I'm just confirming the date, March 2nd.
Okay. So this is another one of those items where there was a hearing date, what seems like in the long ago, distant past. And so that is why this is on our agenda for an actual vote on it tonight. The hearing date already was set. Thank you so much. Clerk Borling, please call the roll.
Commissioner Pradel,
Yes.
Commissioner Urban,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Griffin,
Yes.
Mayor Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Cunningham,
Yes.
Commissioner Hess,
Yes.
Commissioner Knott.
Yes.
Thank you so much. The motion passes. City Manager Ritzma.
Yes, item H2, adoption of an ordinance authorizing the issuance of wastewater supply system revenue bonds, Series 2020, for an amount not to exceed $11 million, in adoption of a notice of sale resolution.
Commissioners, the recommended action is to adopt the ordinance and resolution. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Sorry, I missed. Okay. Made by Commissioner Urban, supported by Commissioner Hess. Okay. Any discussion? Clerk Borling, please call the roll.
Commissioner Urban,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Griffin,
Yes.
Mayor Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Cunningham,
Yes.
Commissioner Hess,
Yes.
Commissioner Knott,
Yes.
Commissioner Pradel.
Yes.
Thank you, Commissioners. The motion passes. City Manager Ritzma, item H3.
First reading of an ordinance to amend the text of Appendix A in Chapter 50, the zoning ordinance, to allow adult use and medical marijuana uses, and schedule a public hearing for May 18, 2020.
Thank you so much, City Manager. Is there a presentation on this item?
Yes, our city planner, Christina Anderson.
Yes, thank you. And this will actually be a presentation that covers both this item as well as the information for the text amendments to Chapter 20B. We'll put it all in one. So just give me a moment to share my screen, hopefully. Okay, thank you very much. So I'm going to start off by answering a question that I think the mayor will ask us at the end of this presentation, which is a little bit about process and where are we in this and what is still yet to come. And so on the screen in front of you is a list of all the activities that have occurred since last fall, when this body voted to temporarily opt out of adult use marijuana, setting a June 1 deadline. Since then, a variety of public meetings have been held, presentations made, question and answer sessions, small discussion groups to focus on social equity, zoning, how the industry works to make sure that we are calibrating everything correctly. So what is up in front of the commission tonight are the first readings and the scheduling of the public hearings for the changes for the zoning code that are required to allow adult use marijuana in the city of Kalamazoo, as well as the changes to Chapter 20B as it relates to the license and the business operations. The social equity policy is part of the discussion tonight, and all of the commissioners have a copy of it. However, that is going to be presented in a more formal way at the next meeting with a resolution that would be an actionable item. So that kind of gives you just a little bit about what we're doing tonight versus what we're doing at the next meeting. Some of this what both Clyde, Dorla, and I are going to present tonight. Some of it will be a little bit of an overlap from what we did in our town hall last week. Or excuse me, not town hall, that was in April. Last week was the city commission work session, but we wanted to make sure that we presented the information so those who are tuning in for more recently are able to see everything that is in front of you tonight. So I'm going to start off by talking about the zoning, and then Dorla will talk about social equity, and I will try not to ruin the PowerPoint presentation in the middle of hers. And then Clyde will wrap us up to talk about licensing and business operation requirements. So what is on the screen in front of you are the 10 business types, adult use marijuana license types that the state has laid out for municipalities in Michigan to opt in or out of. Those on the left of your screen very closely mirror what is permitted in Kalamazoo for medical marijuana. Grower, and there are 3 classes, although the number of plants in adult use differ slightly from the maximum number of plants from medical. But kind of same idea. Grower, processor, so the business that takes the product from the grower to process it into something usable. Safety compliance, which is like a medical laboratory to test the product for safety and strength. Secure transport, which is a commercial business to move goods between grower and processor in the laboratory, and to the location where we sold. And then retailer, which for adult use marijuana is the shop where it is sold. Under medical marijuana, this is known as a provisioning center. On the right side of your screen are 5 new license types. Excess grower, which allows someone who holds a certain number of large medical marijuana grow licenses and a couple of adult use grow licenses, the ability to stack for a very large facility. Micro business, which is a small scale combination of growing up to 150 plants, being able to process that product right on site and sell it right on site. A consumption establishment or designated consumption establishment is a commercial business that allows for the consumption of marijuana, but not the sale or purchase. And then the last 2 are tied to events. One is a license to organize marijuana events, and one is the license to hold an event. As we discussed last week at the work session, staff has recommended that those last 2 be held off on for right now. Public events, the face of public events might change based on the COVID virus. And so the thought would be to kind of pause on that until until we get a little closer to those events happening again. So end of this year, beginning of next year. I want to point out before I move to the next slide that there are different colors here, and you're going to see that throughout the presentation, and there's a reason why. The state of Michigan has put a requirement on anyone who's getting a state license, has put a couple of requirements on some of these uses, and that really makes an impact on who can apply for them. And it made us think about how we incorporate them into our zoning code. So anything that's in green, which are the larger businesses, so the 3 largest growers, processor, secure transport, and retailer. The state of Michigan, until December of 21, has said that in order to apply for this type of business license, you need to already hold a medical marijuana license. So these are only open to people who are already in the industry. Those that are listed in blue, Class A grower, the smaller grower, and the micro business, in order to apply for them, the state of Michigan has put a residency requirement, being a resident of the state of Michigan, on those two, again, until December of 2021. And those listed without an additional color notation do not have any those type of residency or previous license requirements. And you'll see again that those are carried out because those that are not exclusive to existing industry applicants, we really tried to think thoughtfully on how we can allow those and where to make sure that we are providing an opportunity for folks, for residents of Kalamazoo to participate who may not already be in the industry. And so I'm going to go quickly through these. So how is a grower permitted or proposed to be permitted in Kalamazoo? For the most part, they're permitted in manufacturing districts. The one exception to this is Class A, so the smallest grower. In doing research and looking at it, seems very similar to what could be done in a commercial greenhouse, which is permitted already in our community commercial district. So we're proposing to allow Class A in addition to being a manufacturing and community commercial. Now, each of these 8 business types have where they're permitted, plus there are required standards associated with them. So almost all the uses must be 1,000 feet from K through 12 schools, 500 feet from licensed childcare, and then there'll be a couple of other restrictions, such as this one. If you're doing any outdoor growing, which the state allows, you must be 500 feet away from a residential district. And if you're growing in Class A, it must be indoors. We're not going to give the opportunity for outdoor growing in the community commercial district. A processor, which again is a license type that is limited to those already in the industry for the time being, is allowed in manufacturing districts. Same restrictions as relates to K through 12 schools and licensed childcare, and must also be conducted within an enclosed building. Safety compliance, which we took to have a very similar impact as a medical laboratory. We've allowed in a wide variety of locations, including commercial districts, mixed use districts, manufacturing, as well as the Business, Technology, and Research District, also known as BTR. This is the only of the business license types that we are proposing not to have that distance from schools and childcare because of its similarity to a medical laboratory or commercial laboratory. Secure transporter is next. Again, this is the business that transports the good between locations, allowed in both manufacturing and the community commercial district. When it's located in community commercial district, we really want to limit the amount of space that facility can dedicate to warehousing and really focus on just the transport element. Retailer. And so I think this is the one that's kind of probably garnered the most attention. This is the location where a marijuana product could be sold. So we have proposed to allow it in 2 districts, our community commercial district, which matches where medical marijuana dispenser or provisioning centers are permitted, as well as Live Work 1, because, as I mentioned in our first item today, we are in the process of updating our zoning code. Some things have gotten a little bit out of order because of the COVID, delayed some processes that had already started. But in several places, community commercial is located in our commercial corridors that are likely to change to Live Work 1. And so we wanted to keep consistency with medical marijuana, and to understand those changes, we are also proposing Live Work 1 for retailers. However, there are a lot of standards, including a new one that we are proposing today that we distributed right before the meeting. So the ones are schools and childcare. We've already talked about that. Definitely relates to retailer. Retailers must be located 1,000 feet apart from each other or from a provisioning center, provided that they're not co-locating in the same lot or building. What cannot be located on the same building or property with packaged liquor uses or convenience stores or gas stations that sell alcohol. There are some intersections that there's a separation distance required from those. And what's new tonight is something that we've been talking about and listening to public comment on, and knowing that the Live Work District is going to be expanded. We want to make sure that it's still remaining on our streets that were intended for commercial use and not accidentally creep into the neighborhood. So we want to make sure that when it's in Live Work 1, it's only on our larger street types and not accidentally our neighborhood streets as they go into our residential core. Retailer does have an exception to it. And that is that a separation between retailers of 500 feet is permitted in a couple of very specific circumstances. One is when the majority owner is a city resident within a designated census tract. The second is when a city resident has a marijuana conviction, as long as there's not distribution to a minor. And that is tied to our social equity policy that is a companion to these zoning changes. A retailer currently, it's noted in green, so it must already be someone who is, at least one of the owners is someone who is in the industry already. And so this is a way to think about how we can get some local folks into the industry sooner rather than later with some partnerships. Microbusiness. Microbusiness is allowed in manufacturing as well as community commercial and Live Work 2. And the reason that we considered Live Work 2 and community commercial is because this, a microbusiness being both kind of production, small scale production, as well as selling, is very similar to a use that's already in our zoning code, which is called craftsman industrial. So it's if you have a showroom and a retailer in some production space, you don't have to be regulated to manufacturing, right? So think of things like bakeries or candle shops that make something on site with a retail component as its front door. And this felt very similar to that. So microbusinesses have the same separations from schools and childcare. All activities must be done indoors, and it has a required separation between microbusinesses of 500 feet when in Live Work 2 and the community commercial district. Like retailers, there's an exception with the same parameters tied to social equity. So when the applicant is a city resident in a designated census tract, or if the majority owner is a city resident with a marijuana conviction that does not involve distribution to a minor, they are eligible to have a reduction in their distances between microbusinesses. And then finally, the designated consumption establishment. Again, this is that commercial business. This is one of the new uses where marijuana can be consumed but not sold or purchased. This is allowed only in our community commercial district. And I'll let Dorla Bonner take over now to talk about social equity and marijuana in Kalamazoo.
Thank you, Christina. The major difference between the adult use and the medical is the social equity component. It was not a part of the medical marijuana. And basically it was developed to impact those who have been impacted by the war on marijuana. So as the slide says, it was based on the conviction rate as well as poverty levels. And Kalamazoo was one of the 41 communities that was selected. And the social equity at the state level is for reduction in license fees, and it's really focusing on getting those folks who have been impacted into the ownership of facilities. So the license is based on residency and or a marijuana conviction. Next slide. And so we have the opportunity to have our own social equity, and these are the reasons. We want to have a targeted focus on disproportionately impacted individuals, reduce the barriers into the industry, and provide funding for the development and activities that support our shared prosperity, Kalamazoo, strength through diversity, and most of our goals are aligned with what we're trying to do. The goal is to put forth a plan to promote and encourage participation. And this policy is going to apply to all marijuana licenses. Current license holders, medical, will be required to abide by this policy upon renewal, including the requirement to submit a social equity plan. So we only want one equity. We want everybody in the industry to participate in social equity. Next slide. Okay, we have been in the engagement that Christine spoke about. This was a major part of the conversation with both medical providers, people looking to get into industry, and just community residents. So what we've come up with is a combination of the things that we heard and the things that we've researched from other communities and what we know about our community itself. Thank you, Christina. And so what Christina talked about, this is just kind of rehearsing it to put it in the social equity plan policy, is the separation and the distances. And one thing I want to make sure that we understand, when it says 51% of the business ownership is by one of the persons who reside in the census tract, we're not saying that the establishment would be in those census tracts. We're looking for people from those census tracts to be a part of this process. Next slide. And this is more going on with the licenses. It's 25% reduction in fees. And these are, if you look at what the state did, what we wanted to do was mirror what the state did. Some people asked us, why didn't we just say no fees? But there is a cost that goes into the city processing fees and managing this. So we didn't want to take it to where that there would be no fee for these folks, but we did want to support a reduction in fees. This is the part that we think is important because we know everybody, because of the way the licenses are set up, the major establishments will not be eligible for new entry until 2021. You know, Christina showed the slide earlier of the moratorium on anybody new entering in certain levels. And so even though we know people won't get into the business, we still want people to be impacted by the business, which is where our community impact comes in. At 25% of the revenue will help to train and educate people of color to prepare for ownership. And this is the goal. The goal of this is to, within those 2 years, 21, the next year, we're already at 20, that hopefully we can help folks prepare to enter to the market when those larger establishments become available. We've had a lot of conversations with the medical marijuana providers who have agreed to help provide training because they know the business on how to get people established. We also want to do community outreach on educational marijuana. We need the community to know, just because this is legal, there are some things that are still not legal, you know, so we want to make sure people understand what it means to, what this new arena of recreational marijuana is about. And of course, all of the things that we're trying to do with share prosperity with youth, families, and businesses. Next slide. We also want to make sure that anybody who receives any value or benefit from the city will provide a good faith effort to hire employees from those neighborhoods or census tract, also folks who have marijuana convictions. And this value could be not just tax abatements or building improvement funds. We want all businesses, not just those who receive benefit, but all businesses that are in the marijuana industry to make a good faith effort to hire employees. Next slide. And one of the things we did think about is that we have to have continued compliance. We want to know that people are actually doing what they promised us they would do. So if compliance is met, the fee reductions, and then this every year they have to renew their license. And this is when compliance will be checked. If compliance is met, the fee reductions will be given and continued. If it is not met, no fee reductions will be given. If they took advantage of the social separation opportunities, they would no longer be eligible to operate at that location because that location was targeted for an organization who was an equity organization. And this is where where we're trying to get everybody. Existing businesses can submit documentation to become social equity providers if they did not start off that way. So we can get more providers into the business that are practicing social equity. Thank you, Christina.
Clyde.
Good evening. As I indicated last week when we had the presentation, the current proposed changes to Ordinance 20B, Chapter 20B, which formerly addressed only medical, will now address both medical and adult use. Generally, the permit requirements are going to be the same. There's very little change. It's just a matter of making sure or attempting to have the definitions from two different statutes adopted in two different processes. That is, medical was a legislative enactment. Adult use was a voter initiated and approved law to make them, if you will, dovetail together. It's a difficult process. And the other thing we did, and this was, obviously we try not to do anything in a vacuum, and I want to give some kudos to City Clerk Borling, who is actually the person charged with administering this chapter. And we've learned some lessons through the medical and some challenges that have come through and some gaps where we needed to kind of finesse things. We've tried to close those gaps to give both potential licensees in the clerk's office a little better guidance, and then meld that into the adult use. And I want to thank Scott for his insight and his suggestions, which were incorporated in this ordinance. So basically, as has already been mentioned, this is a yearly license. The fee will be $5,000, but subject to a potential waiver for social equity eligible applicants. And the other major change is that we used to have windows that the clerk was authorized to open to accept applicants for licensure. When this goes into effect, their windows won't exist any longer. It'll be people who come in, and you can come in at any time of the year to make an application for one of these licenses, either for medical or for adult use. I think that's basically it. There's nothing more I can really add to what I said last week.
And so I think we already addressed this information right at the beginning. Where we are tonight is the first reading and the schedule of the public hearing. We've requested that public hearing be held May 18th, which is the next regularly scheduled board meeting. And at that meeting, these items would be up for review and action through the form of a vote. There would be a public hearing associated with it, so additional public comment would be taken. And also the resolution for the social equity policy would be introduced formally that night, also for action. Ordinances take effect 10 days after they are approved. And so this would, if approved on May 18th, would take effect May 28th. And that is it for the presentation.
Thank you so much, all participants in the presentation here. So I'm just for myself, and I know you just provided a clarifying slide there at the end there, but just to help keep this all in context, we're talking about three categories of things. We're talking about zoning, and tonight we're just setting the hearing date, which is our next meeting. So we're not passing to approve it tonight or not. We're just setting that hearing date. We're talking about a licensing ordinance, which we're also setting the hearing date, which will be our next regularly scheduled meeting. Those things are interlocking and overlapping, but there are two separate actions and two separate parts of our code of ordinances. And also intermingled with all this, we're talking about a resolution on our social equity policy, which does not require a first reading or setting a hearing date. That is something we can take care of in one meeting, but we were talking about that tonight. That's also overlapping with everything else, but it's proposed that we'd be voting on that resolution at our next meeting as well. In addition, with all that work being done, we've looked back at our existing language related to medical marijuana, and we are doing the work we need to do to incorporate these things rather than having entirely a separate set of standards that you're looking back and forth and trying to make that one ordinance, so to speak. So that's all the things we've been doing, and we didn't just start that and just start talking about it. We've been kind of talking about this in a variety of ways since at least November, when we talked about giving ourselves this self-imposed date, which was June 1st to get this done, commitment we made. And in addition, we've had a town hall, we've had a work session, and before whatever it was, March, like on the date now, 13th, 14th, or whatever, when we couldn't have public meetings anymore for a while, we had some hearings, some sessions on this in February. So a lot of work, a lot of time stretched out, perhaps made a little more difficult by the fact that we're working in a virtual world right now, but still trying to make that information be as available as possible. And obviously everything that we're looking at is available in its full context, looking at the whole agenda on our website, which you can go to, and you can click on any agenda item and get the full text for any ordinance or any action we're working on tonight. So that all said, this first thing, even we've talked about all these things, H3 is specifically about the ordinance to amend the text of Appendix A and Chapter 15, the zoning ordinance, right?
Correct.
Okay. Anything else then for the good of the order on that? I'm going to have a few questions coming into it, but we're set for now. From as far as staff presentation then?
Oh, yes, that is all we have. We're happy to answer any questions you have.
Okay, so the recommended action is to offer the ordinance for first reading and schedule a public hearing for May 18th. But maybe before I ask for that, if there are questions specific for staff before we go to that, maybe we should start with that. Commissioner Prato, do you have a question?
Yeah, so my question was, would you mind just kind of explaining to the public a little bit about what LW2 zoning looks like that is off the table? And then kind of a second question with that as well is just, with removing LW2 zoning and leaving it, is it LW1 that's left on there, I believe?
So there's not, so Live Work 1 and Live Work 2 are two mixed-use districts that we have in the city. Right now they're mapped on the north side, but we are mid-process of mapping them in Vine and East Side and Edison and some other locations. They at no place have they been removed from the table. What I propose to be added, and since language was sent right before the meeting, was when a retailer is located in Live Work 1, we want to make sure that we're not accidentally allowing it to creep into off our main commercial corridors and go into more residential areas. And so we really want to make sure that when it's in Live Work 1, that we're allowing it on the right street type. And so those are our busier, more active commercial streets, and not our neighborhood streets. And, this is a technique that we've used in other places of the zoning code. Certainly, I imagine Kalamazoo really talked about tying land use and streets together to make sure that we're pairing them appropriately. And that is the only change that is the change that I was referring to. So when a retailer is located in Live Work 1, I'd like to make sure that we're adding the restriction that it can't, a retailer cannot open on when it's located on a neighborhood street. And again, that's to keep it out of, turning the corner off the commercial corridor into the neighborhood.
And I definitely can appreciate, and I can definitely understand, and appreciate where some of that public comment came from in regard to the concern about the Live Work 2. My only question is do you foresee any issues about this impacting the social equity components? Because in some ways it would take some properties off the table. And then the second thing is, I would imagine typically, and correct me if I'm wrong here, you might see slightly higher property values in an LW1 because they're on major more traffic corridors. And so I guess the reason I'm asking is, do we somehow box out the people we're trying to help by by limiting it to areas that the property values might be more, or they become more valuable because there's less land to occupy? Does that make sense?
Yes. So to answer your first question, it will remove a couple of potential locations. I would argue that because those locations are on neighborhood streets and not our commercial streets, that is an okay reduction of spaces. I would say that it also should not, we are still trying to we can do that and still stay to our goal of making sure that we're allowing them in a wide number of locations to mitigate the concern that we heard post medical marijuana, that because it was only allowed in so few locations, property values skyrocketed, which priced people out of the industry. I think that this is a change that removes locations that probably aren't appropriate, while still making sure that we're allowing it in a wide range of spaces, therefore, trying to stay true with our social equity policy and trying to manage property values and spreading them out through our community.
Yeah, thank you.
Other questions, commissioners? I've seen no one at this point. I have a few. So I just want to go back to process here for a little bit of starters. When something like this comes to us, it must go to the Planning Commission first. That's correct. The standard process. And it comes to us with a recommendation from the Planning Commission. And they do their detailed zoning work, and that recommendation comes to us, which we can follow or change. And generally speaking, we are expecting that we will be looking at the same ordinance, substantively speaking, that the Planning Commission looked at. So I know that you've been working here at the last minute, just trying to make a couple little tweaks and adjustments. So even though we have some talking about a particular version of this, I'm sure one that you have determined that these little adjustments are not sufficiently, cause change to have to take this back to the Planning Commission. So is that accurate?
I would say that is accurate. Let me also just go back to where you started. Yes, the Plan Commission did review the zoning proposal before it came to you. They themselves, in their review and through public comment and discussion, made a couple of minor tweaks, which we discussed at our work session last week, including limiting the places where the designated consumption lounge can be located, and asking to remove the downtown from retailer as well for now, so that those locations can be discussed when we do the downtown mapping. So with those additions, Plan Commission approved it, recommended unanimously to you. So it is a bit of a process, right? Through the public hearing with the Plan Commission, those tweaks can happen. As what is before you tonight, the edit that I referred to in the presentation and that I discussed with Commissioner Pradel, I would argue is pretty minor as it relates to intent for both the zoning as well as the social equity piece. And so Attorney Robinson and I felt that we were comfortable with adding it tonight, and if he wants to chime in on that, that would be great.
I would only buttress what Planner Anderson has already indicated. The other thing is that there is no requirement for you to return this, even if it's a substantive change, any legal requirement, you return it back to the Planning Commission. You are permitted to do that under the planning statute, but you're not required to.
That provides some clarity. I appreciate that, Attorney Robinson. So what you provided to us, just to be clear, is the fact that you a couple changes in a couple sections, right, of what we're looking at, which is the section 50. And there is one section which you referenced with Commissioner Pradel, which is item 6A. And you added in that section this located in a suburban connector or main street, right? Just those words. But then there was also another section where you added some things in terms of distance requirements.
And those, the first, I just want to, before we go into that, the first ones that relate to the street types, staff recommends, we included it in our presentation, and would like you to consider very strongly. Okay. The second set of proposed changes, we wanted to put on the table for discussion, knowing that we were going to have some potential public comment that related to distances. And so we wanted to put it out there as if that was something that this body was interested in discussing and making changes, here's staff's recommendation for where you could go.
Okay. Are you willing to have a little discussion about that then?
Sure. Do you want me to detail it?
Sure.
Sure. Sorry. What the second proposed edit is to add under general provisions under adult use marijuana, under B as it relates to location criteria. And this is the section that talks about 1,000 feet distance from K through 12 schools and 500 feet from licensed childcare facilities. What is put forward for discussion is adding playgrounds, public pools, and youth centers to the 500-foot buffer or protected buffering. And those, we kind of were taking a logical progression from schools, so youth, and considering other youth-focused businesses for to set back any additional buffers. And so schools, licensed childcare facilities, playgrounds, public pools, youth centers are all extension of those youth-focused businesses.
Okay, thank you so much. So this is a proposal for discussion. I would say we did hear some public comment about distancing issues, although it also maybe included some other things as well, rehab centers and some other locations, maybe in addition or indoor like this. So we did hear some comment about that, right?
Correct.
Okay, I don't want to belabor this point with us tonight, but one of the things that I know that we've been doing over the course of time is trying to give, once again, location opportunities. So we heard a lot of input from people in the business about that, and the fact that our existing locations as defined for medical really virtually almost boxed out any new opportunities purely based on our distance requirements and the zoning locations, right? So we're trying to address that in what seems like a thoughtful way. So this would provide further limitation, but I don't know if there was a way to note how much more it would restrict opportunities. I mean, once you start kind of throwing darts at the zoning map, you have to start counting backwards to see what that means.
So I could not tell you if the additional 500 feet from playgrounds, public pools and youth centers were added. I couldn't tell you tonight how many additional locations that would be taken from that. I can tell you that adding those is still a big step away from what was in the medical marijuana ordinance, because it included a longer list, like universities and churches. Some of those were added to the 1,000-foot buffer and not 500. So it really did take out much larger areas of opportunity, which limited medical provisioning centers to very few locations, which is likely why the property values were as high as they were in those areas. Right. And so, again, we are trying to, when you do any zoning, marijuana or otherwise, it's always a balance between making sure that we're following best practice, managing public input, managing, doing research with other communities and putting them all together into, the best set of ordinances to tick all of the boxes that we are most concerned with.
I appreciate that very much. Thoughts or questions about this, commissioners? Okay, so I feel like I'm really eating up a lot of time here, but it's a big thing. I want to make sure it's all clear what we're doing here. The first recommendation that you proposed is in the ordinance that we would be setting the hearing date on, right? It's recommended, related, or do we have to take any special effort to incorporate this idea of being on suburban connector or a main street?
The answer to that, Mayor, is that yes, you should amend the proposed ordinances this evening if you wish to proceed with those amendments. That gets into the area of, while I think we both said these are minor adjustments, the question becomes, are they a substantive adjustment? And if so, then it really needs two readings. It would be better for you for the commission to make those amendments this evening so that the public knows that's what is going to be proposed and voted on in 2 weeks' time.
So Attorney Robinson, we would have to take a separate action to amend before
Correct.
taking the action to set the hearing.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, Commissioner Cunningham.
My intent after this, was to review the maps again with Christina, to get further clarity. So I'm not opposed to moving forward with amendments, but let me ask Attorney Robinson, if there are some additional pieces that we need to change, or if we decide that we do not like the amendment or something along those lines, would that require us to set another date or push the hearing date out again?
Well, I want to do anything that would avoid pushing out the dates.
Correct.
For other reasons, because of the self-imposed June 1st deadline. And this is a judgment call. It would seem to me that the more substantive change is the one that you would take live work one and require that those locations be on a suburban connector or main street. The other one, in regard to the distances, 500 distances from public playgrounds, pools, and youth centers, that already exists within our medical marijuana. So it really, I don't think that would have much of a change. I don't see that as substantive, because we've already got something along those lines, and it would only be saying, yeah, we're going to take what's applicable for medical and make it also applicable for adult use. So I don't see that as necessarily a significant one. So if you wanted to put that in either tonight and then remove it later, or wait until 2 weeks' time, I think we can probably do that. I'm a little more comfortable with that. But changing live work one and changing the parameters of what that zone permits and say, no, you're restricted to, if you will, major streets, or that's a different matter. I think that's more substantive. So that needs to be either be done tonight and adopted in 2 weeks. And if you strip it out in 2 weeks' time. That's probably, I would say that's not a major change, because that's obviously there's a history now of considering it, putting it in. Oh, we've looked at it a little more. We don't think it's a good idea. So at least in that regard, I would urge the commission to adopt that change this evening. I think you should do them both, but certainly that one is the more problematic of the two.
Thank you, Attorney Robinson. Other questions for staff or thoughts? Yeah, Commissioner Pradel.
Yeah. Are we able to comment right now, or are we only asking questions?
Well, I'm trying, we haven't made them. We'd have to go back and start making motions, and we'd have a discussion on it. Correct me if I'm wrong, Attorney Robinson. I think right now we're trying to ask staff questions, or does it matter how we approach it?
I don't know that there's one way you can do it. If you got questions, as long as we work through the process, but I don't know. I don't want to necessarily pigeonhole anything at this point there, because the discussion may reveal some things.
How about I pose it as a comment, but with the hope that maybe you could clarify or share your thoughts? Does that work?
Go ahead. Question.
So one of my concerns with the social justice component is just that my worry is this is adding more hurdles. And I think that the more hurdles that we add potentially to the zoning, the harder it's going to make for the populations that we really want to make sure that social equity is serving. The second thing is looking, I mean, we have 30 parks and public spaces in the city of Kalamazoo, and the vast majority of those will have playgrounds. I can think of at least one public pool. And I tried really quickly to Google search as many youth centers as I possibly could, and there's a decent chunk list of those as well, besides the ones I can just think of off the top of my head. And there's only 25 square miles in the city of Kalamazoo. So, my reservation is I worry that it's getting too nitpicky in terms of the zoning to add things like playgrounds and youth centers and the public pools. Namely because, again, I think it will adversely impact the social justice that we're trying to push. But secondly, my other concern is just that it's just going to make it too cumbersome that really no one has a chance, because there's such a saturation of those places, and especially without a chance to really examine those and look at them on a map and still adhere to our June 1st deadline. I have reservations about adding those. And I say that as a parent with young people in my household. They have to be 21 or older to use it. So that's just my view, and I'm just kind of curious how you feel about that.
Is there a question there for you, Attorney Robinson?
I don't know, but that may be a question better addressed to Planner Anderson. I can say that I'd have to check it again, but the playgrounds pool language is, as I recall it, when we put it on the medical side, it was couched in some language that could be found in other ordinance or other statutes in terms of drug-free zones away where places that children would normally be expected to gather. And so as to give that barrier where kids are going to be. And that is consistent with why this group of things were added, and some of the others, some of the other protected uses on the medical side were not. And so this is not that big a stretch, if you will, so as to protect those areas where children are likely to gather and keep some separation distance between adult use marijuana, which, as you heard from the comment that was earlier, open to anybody who's 21 and over, much like, I think you might be able to make the analogy, it's like a liquor store, as opposed to the medical side, which was limited to only 3% of the state's population was going to be able to trade those types of businesses.
Thank you, Attorney Robinson. If you don't mind, I don't want to catch you off guard, Director Bonner, but we're talking about social equity and this tweaking. Is there something you'd like to weigh in on?
Well, that zoning piece is really from the planning side, and how that worked. I hear what you're saying, Commissioner Pradel, that it has the potential to limit spaces and complicate things for the folks we're trying to serve. But this is very complicated and limiting overall. and just the way it's written from the state level. Thank you, Mayor, for allowing me to speak, but it's really a zoning issue, and my goal was to work within the zoning for social equity. So Christina would be a better person to speak on that, but thank you.
So,
yeah, Christina.
So quickly, the two that are on the table for inclusion, the street type 1, though a more substantive change to the document because of it does not exist in medical, is not going to have a huge impact on numbers. It's kind of there are some locations where it would impact. It's more forward thinking as we map live work 1 throughout our community. We want to make sure that we're doing so thoughtfully and thinking about commercial corridors and not smaller neighborhood streets. The parks limiting if the 500 feet for playgrounds, public pools, and youth centers was added, that would certainly remove a number of other locations. And, we can, between now and the 18th, do a mock-up map to estimate that and show you what that looks like, whether you choose to include it tonight or at the next meeting. We can help round out some of those numbers, as long as we all know that when we do that, we're guesstimating, right? Because we can show you what kind of gets blocked out based on the distances. We could guess if everyone lines up perfectly and follows the distance requirements, and everybody agrees to buy properties that are 1,000 feet or 500 feet apart from each other, and everyone who wants to sell their property does, which we know is probably not fully the case. But we can certainly round out information for you to so you can have a better idea of what that looks like in terms of limitations.
Thank you. Commissioner Urban.
He's muted.
Muted right now.
I'm muting. There we go. Well, it seems to me that these two amendments that are being proposed have come from public input, and so this is coming from the communities that we're required to serve. We're not serving just the marijuana industry or the people even who have been impacted by previous marijuana laws against marijuana. We're also charged with looking after the concerns of everybody else in the community as well. Since these two amendments seem to come from that segment of our community, it seems like it'd be prudent to include both of those proposed amendments in our deliberations for tonight. And if we get pushback from another side, in the meanwhile, we could take them back out 2 weeks from now. But at least we're covered in saying that, yes, we hear you, the public. These are issues that you brought to us. I'd like them to be fully recognized and considered.
Thank you, Commissioner Urban. Other thoughts, questions for staff?
Mr. Mayor.
Commissioner Bradel?
Just as a point, and granted, I do have some email to catch up on, admittedly, but I can't say that I've been particularly slammed with public comment regarding, parks or, playgrounds and those sort of things. I'm not saying I haven't received any comments about them, but certainly not to like candy cane level scale. And so, I mean, I guess the question is, I'm kind of curious from everybody else, have you heard an overwhelming number of people comment, that they don't want that?
That's a good question. So I'm going to let that sit just for a minute. I have a couple other quick questions here for Planner Anderson. So I know that some concerns were passed on to you via email from Maddie Jordan Woods, and you responded to those. Do you want to say anything? And I was under the impression maybe she was going to call in tonight. She didn't get an opportunity to do that. Do you want to say anything about that interaction that you think is appropriate to the actions we're going to take?
So there were two questions asked. One was a clarification on the location of designated consumption lounges. And if where they're located, they're proposed to be located in the Community Commercial District, CC. And were there restrict distance, what were the distances required for the consumption lounges? Meaning, are they buffered from the schools, the daycares, churches, other facilities, kind of understanding the difference between what was medical and what was adult use. And so the answer to that question is permitted in the Community Commercial District only. At one point, it was included in downtown, will be saved for the downtown discussion for mapping at a later time. And the only buffered distance requirements for that use are the 1,000 feet from school and 500 feet from licensed daycares. The second question that was asked was estimating how many retailers could open in the community. There was an email that estimated one number that was shared with Maddie, and I responded with what staff had researched. And so again, which might change based on our discussion tonight. What we estimated was approximately, there could be 38 new retailers that open up. And what that takes into account is every available land in CC and Liverpool 1 that's not in the buffered zone is available for sale. That each business locates exactly, they all line up and work together to line up 1,000 feet from each other. That, the available sites aren't associated with a gas, there's not a gas station on the site that sells alcohol or a convenience store, a packaged liquor store, that all the lots are buildable, right? There's a lot of asterisks. It's just kind of we're going to lay the pins out. We did further research to that, which said, of that number, how many have active uses on them right now versus how many are vacant? How many did we hear from when medical marijuana was first happening, that the current property owner probably wasn't interested in selling for that business or any business? And so you factor all of those in, you consider the street addition that I recommended, and you're taking out, you're putting 12 to 15 of those in the unlikely category because of other factors. Again, all we're trying to do is make an estimate, right? And there's a lot of factors that have to line up for that. But that I responded with that information to Ms. Jordanwood's question based on that.
Thank you so much. One more question from me, and that is that I've already contacted you, Plan Anderson, about this as well. Mm-hmm. There was a fairly recent request made from someone who happens to be downtown, a business person right now, who was wondering, would it be possible for a safety compliance location to be a permitted use downtown, to kind of get ahead of this whole idea that, we're still have as yet to do our divisions downtown and determine what could be there. And so I don't know if you want to comment on that a little bit, what that would do to the process. And
sure. Yeah. So prior to Plan Commission, the proposed draft that was released back in February had two adult use uses proposed for downtown. The designated consumption lounge and a retailer. It did not have the safety compliance proposed at the time. Plan Commission in their review said, look, I know we're about to redo mapping in downtown Kalamazoo. Let's pull these uses right now and let's think about it as it relates to those uses this summer, hopefully when you talk about downtown zoning through a public process. So one, safety compliance was not on the list originally. It doesn't mean that it couldn't be under discussion for inclusion on the list, and that public process, mapping the districts that were approved in your first action tonight, and really locating them and figuring out what uses go where is a that is a very logical, perfect time to have that discussion. And it's certainly possible that in some locations, safety compliance could be added as a permitted use or permitted use with restrictions, but that's something that we would discuss then. But as of right now, there's nothing proposed in what's before you for downtown.
Okay, thank you so much, Planner Anderson. So I apologize if I'm dragging this out, and I'm not trying to do that. I guess I'm just trying for, maybe it's just me, needs to just have some clarity about the work we're doing. And a lot of the discussion we're having is also entirely germane to the next action we're going to take. So presumably we won't have to go through all this again. So that said, does someone want to make a proposal? I'm sorry, Commissioner Hess.
I don't want to make a proposal, but I want to maybe respond to Commissioner Pradel, his concern about social equity, in that our social equity policy, from what we heard last week at the work session, is as robust as any social equity policy in the state. And so I think moving forward, we probably will have that, the equity as a part of what it is we're doing here. But I think safety is a big part of what we need to look at.
Thank you, Commissioner. What I'm asking for now then, absent any further discussion, is does anyone want to make a motion related either to zoning code section 50-4-4E .1.b, which is the public playground, public pool, and or youth center, and or the section, many of the precursors, but 6A, which adds the designation as far as being located on a suburban connector or main street. Does anybody want to make a motion to add either one or both of those things tonight to the documents that we have?
I'll make a motion for both.
So Commissioner Cunningham has made a
both.
motion to add both of these proposed changes to our zoning ordinance, zoning code section 50-4. Is there support for that motion?
I'll support that.
Okay. Motion supported by Commissioner Knott. I saw your hand, Commissioner Urban, but I heard Commissioner Knott first. So any discussion on those two proposed amendments? Commissioner Cunningham.
So I think this is a scenario where, we see the value in our community planning team that works hard before they even make recommendations to us. And so, I think that what Commissioner Pradel has presented is very valuable. I think that this is something that, between now and our next meeting, I will take a closer look and get as much information as possible so that I have a better understanding. And then also, Clyde, I'm sorry, let me ask one more question. If we did make an amendment at the next one, we could still call emergency meeting before the end of this month to potentially have another hearing.
Well, not adopted. Your ordinances, either they have to be an emergency, which is not the case, or they have to be adopted at a regular meeting. You can introduce ordinances at a special meeting, but you can't adopt them short of a declared emergency. And I wouldn't think that even the COVID-19 emergency doesn't cover this type of action.
But Commissioner Cunningham, to your point, I understood you to say, Attorney Robinson, that you didn't think it was a substantive enough change at our next meeting if we ended up stripping, say, one of these items out.
Right.
I thought I heard one was and one wasn't.
Well, like I said, the one in regard to the streets to change live work one, That's a little more substantive, like to protect pools and playgrounds and youth centers. We already do that on the medical side anyway, so I don't see that as necessarily a substantive change. And the reason why I said, let's do this evening, because we can show a legislative progression, if you will, that you amended it, you considered it, and after 2 weeks of consideration, maybe some public comment or looking at maps, that's not such a good idea. I think it's easier to take things away than attempt to add them on. So I'm again, it's a judgment call, but I'm a little more comfortable with taking the action tonight and removing one or both of them in 2 weeks' time.
Thank you, Attorney Robinson. Other discussion? Commissioner
Mr.
Prado.
Mayor. Yeah. And I'll say this, like, I have the utmost respect for our city planning team and city attorney. I know you guys put a ton of work into this and certainly appreciate it. I think some of my consternation comes from the fact that it's coming down to the wire for us to pass this. And it feels somewhat, to me, slightly irresponsible to pass something that we don't even know the necessary ramifications of how that pinpoints our counts for businesses, which causes me some concern. But again, going back to that whole property value, every single time that we remove a chunk of zoning, we're making it one piece harder for people who are struggling to get into the industry, harder for them to get into the industry, whether it be because of raised property value, difficulty navigating where in terms of proximity to get it. And I'm saying that from somebody who, I'm not trying to advocate for the pot industry. I'm trying to advocate for the social equity component of it. I am personally not a pot user, and I know that puts a target on me, but I'm not saying it because I'm trying to defend it as a pot user or somebody that's trying to defend the industry. I'm saying it as somebody that's trying to advocate on behalf of the social equity component to it, without the ability to closely examine it and still try to stick to that June 1st deadline. And so, utmost respect for Commissioner Urban, Commissioner Hess, Commissioner Cunningham, and the city planning staff, but that's where my reservation comes from on that.
Thank you, Commissioner Prado. Any other discussion? So I guess the last comments on this I'll make, and that is that, I share some concern with Commissioner Prado about that. But I am comforted by the fact that if we get some feedback on that, we can determine that we can take one of these amendments back out. That's what our city attorney said at our second reading. So I think that's going to be my approach. Clerk Borling, can you please call the roll?
Vice Mayor Griffin.
Yes.
Mayor Anderson.
Yes.
Commissioner Cunningham.
Yes.
Commissioner Hess.
Yes.
Commissioner Knott.
Yes.
Commissioner Pradel.
Yes.
Commissioner Urban.
Yes.
Thank you, commissioners. That motion has passed. So now we are back to the recommended action on H3 here. And the recommended action is to offer this ordinance, now somewhat amended, for first reading and schedule a public hearing for May 18th. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Support.
Motion made by Commissioner Knott, supported by Commissioner Cunningham. Let me see. Is there any discussion on this? All right. Clerk Barling, please call the roll.
Sorry.
Maybe there's.
I'm sorry. Commissioner Cunningham.
Once again, I want to reiterate the gravity of this decision. Understanding the long-term effects that we are introducing a new industry to our community, and it is our responsibility to ensure that we dot every I and cross every T. I know that we have a self-imposed deadline, but I want my colleagues also to feel comfortable in knowing that I support. If there needs to be an extra week or two, then there needs to be an extra week or two. Once again, like I said, this is something that'll be looked back on 100 years from now, and they'll say this is how it started and this is what it looked like, and this is the reason why we have these impacts, whether positive or negative. So please understand the gravity of this potential industry in our community. But those were my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Cunningham. Other comments, discussion? All right, Clerk Borling, please call the roll.
Mayor Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Cunningham,
Yes.
Commissioner Hess,
Yes.
Commissioner Knott,
Yes.
Commissioner Pradel,
Yes.
Commissioner Urban,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Griffin.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes. City Manager Ritzma.
H4 is the first reading of an ordinance to amend Chapter 20B of the Kalamazoo City Code to provide for the permitting and regulation of adult use marijuana businesses.
Is there any presentation separate for this one, Manager Ritzma?
No, Your Honor.
Without, I don't know if there's any questions particular to this, but Commissioners, the recommended action is to offer the ordinance for first reading. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Motion made by Commissioner Hess,
Support.
supported by Commissioner Knott. Is there any more discussion on this portion of our work? Seeing no one, Clerk Borling, please call the roll.
Commissioner Cunningham,
Yes.
Commissioner Hess,
Yes.
Commissioner Knott,
Yes.
Commissioner Pradel,
Yes.
Commissioner Urban,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Griffin,
Yes.
Mayor Anderson.
Yes.
Oh, you may.
Thank you so much. The motion passes. Next are reports and legislation. City Manager Ritzma.
Yeah, just a couple of things tonight. First of all, we issued a media release today about our park spaces reopening this Wednesday. After consulting my staff, and we made the decision to do that. We didn't do so lightly, thinking where we need to continue for social distancing and taking appropriate safety precautions regarding the COVID-19. And at this point, playgrounds and facilities will remain closed until we get further guidance from the state and we can reopen those. So that's coming this Wednesday. And then my staff and I continue to work on what reopening looks like for the city. And right now we're projecting that occurring on June the 1st. And I'll have more details about that as we draw near to that. Again, that's based upon current projections of executive orders and so forth. That's all I have, Your Honor.
Thank you, Manager Ritzma. Attorney Robinson, anything?
No, Your Honor.
Clerk Borling.
Yes, I just wanted to mention that tomorrow, May 5th, is the election, the special election. Wanted to let people know that City Hall will be open for in-person voting on, or I should say tomorrow, from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. I do want to note so that people have the right expectation that in-person voting is going to be absentee voting. When people come, they can come in person, they will get an absent voter ballot and they can vote that here, and it will be processed and tabulated by our absent voter counting board. A couple of other things for the election. I wanted to highlight the fact that we do have a new drop box at City Hall. It's on St. John's Court at the end by Lovell Street, and it's actually a drive-up box. If you come down South Street, turn right onto St. John's Place, get almost to Lovell Street. It's on the left-hand side. You can stay in your car, drop off your ballot. Actually, any city business that you have, whether it's utility payments or anything like that, you can drop off there as well. But we would really encourage people who still have absent voter ballots that they can drop that off and they don't even have to get out of their car. It also is set up so you can walk up. There's 2 slots on it. You can walk up from the sidewalk and put a ballot in there from the sidewalk side as well. We do have, I just wanted to let the commission know we have received back and will be processing over 6,700 absentee ballots. That's what we have right now, and we look forward to getting more tomorrow. So just wanted to let people know, you'll get those absentee ballots back, and we will be open tomorrow.
Thank you so much, Clerk Borling. A couple quick questions on that. Do people have up into the end of voting to drop their ballots into that drop box?
Correct. We will be monitoring that drop box through the day, going out and removing the ballots that people drop off, and we will be there at 8 p.m. Someone will be there to collect the ballots right at 8 p.m. so we can get each and every ballot that that people would deposit in the box.
And one last question is that, will you be locking the doors of City Hall at 8 o'clock, or what if people are in line? How does that work if people are wanting to fill out their absentee ballots there at City Hall?
Yes. So if just like in a voting precinct, if a person is in line at 8 o'clock p.m., they will have the ability to get a ballot and cast a ballot. And we'll be here as long as we need to in order for people to have that opportunity to vote, as long as they're in line by 8 p.m.
Thank you, Clerk Borland. I appreciate all your work on that. Now yes, thank you so much. Now is the time for comments from commissioners. Are there commissioners that would like to make comments? Commissioner Cunningham.
Just want to reiterate how important it is to vote. So get out and vote, please. Also want to highlight the census to all of those in the community. Make sure that you are completing that census. It is very vital to the funding and the support that we receive here in the community of Kalamazoo. I want to highlight one of the callers earlier mentioned the trash. And I know that typically after every snow, during this season, it just looks rough in general. But please stay encouraged. If you can mobilize individuals to assist with that, please do. And then also, once again, we are having very important conversations around recreational marijuana. I am intrigued to see where this conversation goes, and I am in full support of our city staff, as I believe they've been doing as good of a job as they can do, considering with the pandemic that we're dealing with. And I just wanted to highlight again also that I look forward to working with Christina in the next couple of weeks to look at that Live, Work, One piece in further detail.
Thank you, Commissioner Cunningham. Commissioner Hess.
Thank you, Clerk Borling and your staff for your dedicated work, especially for the election, but also throughout the months here that we've been on lockdown. Congratulations to the Pradle family for their addition to their family. Little Felix is probably just making your household a joyful one. So I'm really congratulating you and your wife and your family. And then also condolences to anyone who is dealing with the effects of COVID and anyone who has lost loved ones in this crisis. We take it very seriously, and we ask that everyone stay home and stay safe and keep others safe as well. Thank you, Manager Rissima, for working to open the parks at a time when the weather's getting nice and people really needed something to hang their hat on and to be able to go out and just be in a park. That's important, but I would ask that everybody who does use the parks do it safely, maintain social distancing, and don't use the play equipment. And I would just quote an African proverb. If you want to go far, or if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. One thing that I appreciate about this city is how we do it together, and how I believe we're going to go very far. So I appreciate the collaboration and all the work on all of the issues we've talked about tonight and throughout the year. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hess. Commissioner Urban.
Yes, am I on?
Yes.
Good. I wanted to comment on the young woman who was cleaning up Axtell Creek and suggested that some kind of corps of volunteers be formed that can coordinate their work to help keep the city clean. I've from time to time have seen people doing that around the city. I myself have done it mainly for exercise, and it would be wonderful if we all could kind of be aware of each other. So I'm hoping that some people will put some thought to how that can be done in a convenient, non-horribly bureaucratic way, perhaps was via Facebook. Anyway, I was glad to hear her speak up, and I hope we can follow up on that. I like that thought. I like what she's doing. It's building community.
Thank you, Commissioner Urban. Other comments? Commissioner Pradel.
Sure. Just wanted to echo what a couple of my colleagues had mentioned before about our great clerk Borling and Deputy Clerk Moss. If you want to talk about two people who've had to adapt with the times, it has been very consequential. Just even comparing this May 5th election to a record turnout election like the 2008 general election, it's really remarkable how much they're doing and how they're trying to keep up with it. So thank you guys, to you and your team for making that happen. Also wanted to just encourage folks that if you were listening to this or if you read about our discussion tonight, regardless of how you feel on the side of the zoning items that we discussed tonight, please reach out to us. Let us know how you feel, because if we don't hear from you, we just have to make our best judgment calls based on who we're talking to or the couple people we're hearing from. And it's so important we hear from you. And we do pay attention to those things, and we need to hear both sides of the coin. Because again, most of us really don't have skin in the game on either side, but we want to do what's best for the community. And so please, if you have opinions, please reach out, let us know how you feel about it. All of our emails are published on the city's website, and also there's numerous mediums where you can reach out to the city directly, and they'll pass that on to us. The other thing I just wanted to kind of lift up as well is just my concern. KPS has been just doing so much work to work for our kids and adapt to these times as well, both the leadership, but also our educators. But one of my really big concerns as a former educator myself is what our kids are going to face in our city, especially as this prolongs in the months to come, when boredom sets in and, curiosity set in and whatnot, and there are not as many opportunities to stay involved or stay, out of the house and stay busy. And so I guess my challenge is to our community, and I'll try to do my best to live up to this, is to find ways to share our time, our talents, our treasures with organizations and groups that do work with our kids and our youth and our community, and to really double, triple down if you're able to try to do that, especially in these summer months, because it's been a long time out of school and it's going to be a really long summer. And the second one is also, we've heard a lot about how our nonprofits are doing a lot to help folks impacted adversely by COVID. And that's so true. Their demands are going to be greater than ever. So supporting those organizations, but thinking about the nonprofits that aren't necessarily directly serving those who are impacted by COVID to make sure that they can make it through and survive as well. Those treasures in our organization that we take for granted that very well might not be here if we don't do more to step up to support them and their work that we value and want to see here for generations to come in our community. So I just wanted to advocate for that as well. And so.
Thank you, Commissioner Pradel. Vice Mayor Griffin.
Okay, I want to echo some of the comments that my fellow commissioners have already lifted up here. But I just want to start off by really just sending a huge thank you and shout out to all of our youth who are at home and all the parents that are at home with them. I realize that some youth are too young to even understand what we're going through, yet they're still having to be at home, and parents are still having to work through that. So just a huge thank you for all of you for doing that, and to Kalamazoo Public Schools, to the school board, to the administration for all of the work that has been done to make sure that our youth are being educated while we're all going through this pandemic. For the laptops that have been given out to make sure that students can still continue to learn in this space. That's definitely appreciated. Want to give a shout out to all of those who are making sure that our children are fed during this time. To the YWCA, I had a chance to go out with the NAACP. Shout out to Wendy Fields and all of those folks making sure people are getting their masks and making sure they're being notified about the census, why that's still important. I really want to give a huge shout out to Mayor Anderson. I know that this has been lifted up in some of our commission meetings, but I don't know if anybody really realizes how much work he's put in to the shelter, to those that are living in shelter, and really just making sure that that is done in a cohesive way, making sure that there's quarantine spaces, making sure that there's an additional day shelter. A lot of work gets done behind the scenes, and just a huge thank you to you, Mayor, for not forgetting about people. As we're asking people to shelter in place, realizing how many people didn't have anywhere to shelter. And with that, all of the cohorts involved in that, United Way, the Community Foundation, HRI, for making sure that those families, those individuals are treated as human beings throughout this time, making sure they're fed and getting to the jobs that they have while Metro is not running, and just making sure that that still goes on to the neighborhoods and the people that are in the communities looking out for each other. It's beautiful to see how much support the community is reaching out to one another, whether that be dropping off meals, supporting our local restaurants, face masks, whatever. Just a huge shout out to the community for that. I want to lift up again to anyone who's suffering from any loss, COVID related or not. Just a huge condolence to everyone, as this is just a very difficult time as we are dealing with the loss of folks here in our community and elsewhere. Shout out to the family of Anita Ellis McClendon, 6'9". We definitely miss you. I just want to thank our commission and our city staff. I don't know if anybody realizes how much work goes into making sure the city still runs while we're in all this space. And even though as a commission, we don't get to meet and talk, but just the fact that we're still working through this together, that means a lot. That does not mean that we always agree, but that means that we're committed to this community and working together. And that means a lot in these times. So I just can't really stress that enough. Also, to all of the essential workers out there, I just want to say thank you. Every level, whatever you're doing, you're helping us to make sure that we're still running safely, whether that's cleaning, that's food, that's, getting us where we need to go. We cannot thank you enough for that. I just want to encourage people to check on folks in this time. Everyone's not okay. Some are introverted, some are going through a lot of different things, and that is really, really needed at this time. If anyone hasn't had a chance to, I encourage folks to tune into the Community Foundation, their Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation, TRHT. They do have different live stream events that have to deal with, everything from yoga practices to housing and COVID-19, just a lot of different things to kind of get us through while we're dealing in this virtual space. I also want to lift up my daughter, Genesis Griffin, is working with KidNet now, and on the 6th at 6:30 they will be live streaming on YouTube, Zoom, and Facebook Live some youth and hear directly from them and their experiences. This will be all high school seniors, just lifting up what they're going through in this time. And again, shout out to all the graduates, college or high school, 8th grade, kindergarten, otherwise, going through this time. And yeah, I think that's about it. Oh no, before I forget, I just definitely want to lift up for anyone who is has concerns or has lifted up what's happening with our incarcerated population as we're dealing with sheltering in place and what that looks like. For anyone who doesn't know, for our jail population, and this is the last communication that I heard from Sheriff Fuller, in the state, there's 22,000 beds. However, only 8,000 of those beds are filled in terms of the jail population, and that our community specifically is making that effort to make sure we're not just looking at people that are outside of incarceration, but people that are inside incarceration as well. I do stand in solidarity with folks that are fighting for those at the state level for the Michigan Department of Corrections who are still looking to make sure that they are accommodated in this as well. So just to the community, I just want to say to everyone, take care. We're getting those park restrictions lifted, but just please remember to 6 feet, the social distancing. COVID-19 is still very much affecting people. It may seem like we're getting used to this new normal, but it's still very much there. I cannot stress that enough. Just everyone take care, be well, and have a good night.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Griffin. Commissioner Knott, anything? You're good. Okay. Quick question here, just for starters. There was a question tonight, Attorney Robinson, about the governor's executive order and virtual meetings. Did you note that question?
I noted. I will respond to the commission in due course.
Sounds great. So you're working on an answer there. So just a couple things is that I want to remind folks that on Thursday is the National Day of Prayer. We usually have an event that happens on the City Hall steps, which we will not be having this year. There's going to be a virtual event, and there are some folks who are going to participate in that virtual event on that day, and that will be broadcast. I'm participating, and I think Pastor Scott from Galilee is going to be participating, among others. So watch for that. That's on Thursday. Another thing I want to mention, and I think this is something we're recognizing less and less, and I guess because of the age I am, still remembers that something called VE Day, which is Victory in Europe Day, is being recognized on Friday this week, 75 years ago. And my now deceased father was in the Army at that time and was in Germany. That was when, in essence, the end of the European theater of the war occurred. And it's just although in many ways not totally comparable, it's just another time when there was, a very, very big challenge. A lot of families had pain and suffering, and a lot of people stepped up and did what needed to be done to bring that conflict to an end. So I want to be recognizing families and fewer and fewer soldiers that are still around and their families from that time. So that said, I am personally feel like a totally blessed person in that I get to serve with thoughtful, intelligent, committed, and not only that, but beautiful people here on the City Commission and the city staff who are working hard to make sure this work gets done in a thoughtful way. I couldn't be more thankful for the opportunity to get to do that with all of you for our great city. So that all said here, I'm going to close it out by just saying, keep your hearts open. I love you, Kalamazoo, and we are adjourned.
Oh.